Greetings, brothers and sisters. It's June 16th, 2024. This is the Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, Steve Ace. That's talent on loan from Kolob. Every week, my crew and I, we ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. So thanks so much for joining us to discuss the contemporary events in Mormonism. We've got a big episode on hand here. We got BYU-Hawaii has got into hot water with the NAACP. There's a couple of temple updates, including with the Fairview, Texas temple and also the Independence, Missouri temple that we're going to fill you in on. The Mormon History Association is about to have their annual meeting, and they're going to be covering some interesting and controversial topics. And finally, there's an LDS Virtual Summit, which is very interesting on YouTube, and we're going to tell you everything about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
I'd like to welcome onto the program my fabulous co-host, Gustavo. Gustavo, how's it going?
Hi, David. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Who are you and what are you all about?
All right. Well, very briefly, I'm Gustavo Hernandez, as you can read on the screen. 22-year-old. I'm on the younger side in content creation, but I'm LDS, born and raised. And I had what you would call a faith crisis when I was a teenager. So that really got me sucked into content creation, LDS related, mostly in English, because that's where the topics I'm interested in are covered. And very recently decided to start creating content myself, but that's me in a nutshell.
Well, that sounds fantastic. We're going to talk a little bit more about your YouTube channel as we get going along. I didn't realize that you were only 22 years old. I guess you just came back from an LDS mission not too long ago, correct?
That's right. 3 years ago, tomorrow.
Well, congratulations. Let's go ahead and jump into the news here. And this is Gustavo Viajes de Fe. We're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of the episode. And this is our agenda here. You have appeared on a number of different podcasts, everything from the Mormon book reviews to you've even had Mormonism with the Murph. You've had most of your channel content is in Spanish, although some of it with Brian Hales is in English. But this is our agenda here, as we discussed here earlier today. We got a lot of big news articles on tap here. And the first one is at BYU-Hawaii. Now, this student here, he's been fighting the hair policy at BYU-Hawaii. And now his defense here, he was going to be expelled from school because of his so-called dreadlocks here, his unconventional hairstyle, at least according to BYU-Hawaii, which has a very prescriptive, a very prescribed hair policy. And his locks here, Mr. Cannon Barton, I hope I'm saying that right, Cannon Barton, has been fighting the grooming rules that he said were used to discriminate against him. And now the NAACP has come to his defense, including their legal arm, which is called the Legal Defense Fund. I found this video here, which basically will give you a sum up here, Gustavo, and let me know your thoughts about what is happening with BYU-Hawaii and this student.
A student at BYU's Hawaii campus is fighting against the private school's strict hairstyle policy as it regards to his locks. Cannon Barton has been battling the church-run school's rules following a charged interaction last September when a BYU security officer demanded Barton cut his hair or risk expulsion. The officer was referring to the school's honor code, which requires that all students follow certain grooming standards. The code forbids beards and states that students' hair should be neatly trimmed. It also requires students abstain from having sex before marriage and avoid coffee, alcohol, and tobacco. Barton says that although he's not trying to challenge the core teachings of the LDS Church, he does feel that the school's grooming rules are arbitrary and possibly discriminatory, and believes his locks shouldn't prevent him from getting an education. And he's not the first student to push back against the school's grooming standards. There have been cases in the past, like Michael Williamson Tabango, who fought to maintain his long braided hair as part of his culture. Even though Barton's case has drawn attention, the university seems hesitant to budge, despite Barton's efforts to compromise. Barton has managed to find a temporary solution by folding his locks to meet the old length standards, but his family is still hoping for a change in the policy, not just for Barton's sake, but for future generations of students of color who might face the same struggle.
Gustavo, who's right here, Mr. Barton or BYU-Hawaii?
I would say Mr. Barton. And I have a brief background on that. When I was on a mission, I served a bit in Guatemala. And while I was there, I got to meet people from across the continent. And I met people from Ecuador, if I'm not mistaken. They were part of a tribe. I don't know if tribe is a correct word, but part of their traditions was to have waist-length hair. And I remember that I was taken aback the first time I saw them at a mission meeting. And my companion noticed that and told me that it was important for their culture. And he even told me that it was like serious, like it wasn't just like they wanted to be that way. They really thought it was, in a way, sort of sacred to them and their culture. So I remember that I wasn't familiar with those types of traditions, but I learned to respect them. And, if someone is allowed to have waist length hair on a mission, if it's related to traditions, then I don't see why it shouldn't be on college if it's due to traditions. And basically, if missionaries have the more strict rules in the LDS world, I don't see why a college student should keep it. And not just maybe black students, but also Native Americans or even friends from Ecuador, like the ones I met.
Let me read a little bit more from this article and get your thoughts on this, Gustavo. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund is now joining the fight of a black student at BYU-Hawaii who has been pushing for months for the religious school to change its policies on hairstyle after he said he was told to cut his locks or face possible expulsion. Having the national organization on board lends major muscle to Kanan Barton's battle, not only because the Defense Fund is the oldest civil rights law group in the country, but also because of its tie to the NAACP, which has a historic alliance with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which sponsors BYU-Hawaii. In a letter to the private school's president sent last week, the Legal Defense Fund pointed to that partnership and the promise made through it to eliminate prejudice of all kinds, as it argued for the school to update its standards for hair that the students and staff must abide by. As the rules currently stand, the attorneys say they discriminate against people of color by not allowing them to wear their hair in ways that may be culturally significant to them, which applies to Barton's case. And here is a copy of that letter here sent to the president of BYU-Hawaii here from the Legal Defense Fund, which is representing the NAACP. And as this article points out, Gustavo, as you're probably aware, the action from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund is not the organization's first against a school discriminatory policies based on hair. Similarly, the NAACP previously protested in the 1960s against the LDS Church's ban on black men holding the priesthood. And that was the faith policy that was changed in 1978. And we've known here, Gustavo, you're probably aware that the NAACP and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints formed a partnership back in 2021, shortly after President Nelson took the reins. He's given them scholarships. They've had a number of events. In fact, President Nelson himself spoke at the NAACP conference. I want to say it was in 2021. So these two groups are very well aligned together, but we're starting to see a crack in the fissure here, meaning that as soon as the NAACP sees that there is some type of a discrimination, well, it seems like they are not taking the church's side, but they're taking the students' side.
I saw that the legal defense of the NAACP is sort of it's got sort of like sponsorship from the organization, but it's not the same entity per se. So the way I see this is LDS Church and NAACP are like the parents, and BYU-Hawaii and the legal defense are like the children in a way. Maybe this is not a good example, but this is the way I see it. And they're having a disagreement that will eventually reach the parents if it hasn't already. This might be sort of I'll use the parent in some example, like, well, what's your kid doing? And it's like, oh, well, I don't know, but your kid is also not following the rules and things like that. So I do see some tension. What I hope to see is that, because I'm so bad with names, I'm so sorry, Reverend Brown, if I'm not mistaken, since he and President Nelson have a good relationship, I hope, and I think the ideal would be for them to see, oh, there's a problem. Let's not waste any time making a fuss out of this, and let's try to reach a conclusion. As maybe we'll talk in the future about the temple, so the temple issues, and that might give us an idea that maybe some obvious actions are not taken when it should be obvious.
I think what this article points out, if I can just say one last thing about it, is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has had an incredibly troubled history, especially with black persons of black descent, for many, many years. And it seems like President Nelson has said that, well, he's called for that everyone is equal and that we are to leave racism behind. But what we're seeing in BYU-Hawaii is that it seems like the vestiges of racism are still around, because these hair policies are not typically enforced, at least from my perspective, on a lot of white students. And it seems like, once again, that black students and black members of the church, with Mr. Barton here is a member of the church, that they're once again caught in the crossfires of the church's somewhat antiquated policies. And I thought that we were now in 2024 and that we left the vestiges of racism behind. Is this a racist policy, or is this just an honor code that's applied to everyone equally?
I think that would be hard to say because I don't know the intentions of the person who told this kid to either get rid of it or he'll be expelled. I would say a bit of both because, I'm Mexican, male, straight, white, so maybe I haven't had a lot of issues of that. But because I'm Mexican, I've been told when I visited the US, go back to your country or speak English or things like that. So I understand that, hey, aren't we supposed to be humane? And it still happens. So I would say a bit of both. I don't think I know exactly who said it and their intentions, but I would say maybe a bit of both.
Let us know your thoughts out there, listeners and viewers, about Mr. Barton's hair challenge with the NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund. Is the church in the right? Is Mr. Barton in the right? What should be the resolution of this case? Drop us a 5-star review while you're at it. Give us a thumbs up. Give us the notifications. We'd be very grateful for that. Now, obviously, when it comes to church news, as you know, Gustavo, we can't talk about church news at all without talking about temples. Temples are very important. We're going to cover 2 temples in our program today. The first of which is a kind of surprising news, at least from my perspective, and it's a dream come true as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints breaks ground on a new Independence Temple. Why is this such an important temple here, Gustavo? Why is this a dream coming true? And this just happened just a couple of days ago.
Basically, it's Missouri. For a while in the early years of the church, it was in the revelation that Joseph got that Missouri would become Zion. And as we all know, due to a lot of conflicts that never actually happened. So there's a temple lot that's still there. Not much has happened in that side. But I think that having a temple in Missouri is like the dream come true for many. Like, oh, we never got the chance to properly settle. So having a temple can be a big win, or maybe nostalgic looking back.
Let's take a look at what the Church News article said in this particular week. The new temple will sit just 20 miles from the historic site of the church's first ever temple in Kirtland, which was dedicated in 1836 and has recently been bought back by the church as a historic but not serving venue. And as you mentioned earlier, there are actually, Gustavo, already a couple of temples in Missouri, so this will be already added to it. But if you take a look at this picture, this is the so-called temple lot section here, where you have the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, now known as the Community of Christ. You have the Hedrickites, the temple lot. The actual plot here for the Independence site of Joseph Smith's long foretold Independence, Missouri temple is not held by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's not held by the Community of Christ. It's actually held by the church at Temple Lot. So this Independence, Missouri temple, in my opinion, is, shall we say, not exactly what a lot of Latter-day Saints really want. What they really want is the church at Temple Lot, but it seems like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has gotten no closer to obtaining that very, very juicy parcel.
Yes, I would say that it is not quiet what you want. For example, a lot of members of the church, at least here in Mexico, we talk about a temple in Jerusalem and things like that. When people know that there are BYU students in Jerusalem, sometimes they want to say, oh my gosh, the end is near. Yes, I mean, we can call it progress. Maybe it's not nearly the prophecy fulfilled.
Okay, let's keep on going with the temples. Another temple is the Fairview, Texas temple, and this has caused quite a bit of controversy. From Mormon Speak here, we got in Fairview Temple, the LDS Church plans to build a brightly lit temple with a 173-foot tall temple in a rural area. Mayor Henry Lesner said that he would, quote, never approve the plan since it's just grossly out of proportion to everything around here. And this is from the article itself here, where we got a couple of church members and other people saying, they're saying they need the height because it draws your eyes to heaven as part of their religious experience. And this woman here is saying that she, just lives right across the street from the Fairview LDS Church here, Miss Kune. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but religion, she says, has nothing to do with it. We just want the law of the land followed. Gustavo, is it important to have temple heights and spires that are 173 foot tall in residential neighborhoods in order for the faith to be properly venerated?
Maybe I'll have time to do more explanation later, but short answer, no. Here in Mexico, and I think that this has been talked about, I recently listened to the Inside Out podcast on this topic, but basically everyone knows about the Hinckley Temple era, where it was suggested that temples didn't need to be like 40 years in the making, like the Salt Lake Temple, as long as it was available and opportunity to work with the community. And I think that Mexico got a big part of that initiative, because many of the temples here are what you would consider small temples, and most of them, the nearest one I have is the Mexico City Temple. That's the very first one we had, but it's just regular size. It has a visitor center, but the building itself, I think it's just regular. But there are smaller temples. In fact, I'm not sure if this has changed. I think not. But the smallest temple is in Colonia Juarez, Chihuahua, the smallest in the world. And I've been there. And it was just open like once a week, just for a few hours. And it was tiny, tiny. But I enjoyed my experience there. I really liked it. So, I saw that, Nemo the Mormon was at the town hall meeting, and he shared sentiments like that. But someone read the part of the Peacemaker talk by President Nelson. And I know that currently, like, lawyers are pressing into, you have to say that it's part of the religious worship and things like that. So in this case, the reason why I feel comfortable just saying no, this is, at least for me, this is stupid. Like, no one really asked for a building that tall. Adding pressure to that, it's just going to get worse, even if somehow it gets approved and it's built the way it is. The smallest temple in the world, at least as far as I'm concerned, is in Colonia Juarez, Chihuahua, in Mexico. And I've been there. It usually is open just a couple of days a week. But honestly, I don't think it really lacked anything. And so I think that Rebecca Biblioteca mentioned that she was talking with someone in Texas that said, our relation, we weren't really angry about the temple. We just wanted the height to be smaller. But now, because of all of this, I don't think we have a really good relationship with members of the church. I think the stake president is also getting pressure from lawyers to say that this is part of the religious worship. And many people have said it. Nemo the Mormon went to Fairview and said it. That's nowhere in doctrine and things like that. I can tell by experience that it doesn't really matter if I was in the smallest temple in the world. I think the conflict is just dumb, I think. I feel comfortable saying this because I'm really not attacking any doctrines or anything like that, so I can feel very comfortable in saying this is dumb.
Well, let me show you a couple other takes from the article here. It says, why build a temple in Fairview? Whitney Condi, who is an LDS member who lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, she estimated that there's only 300 members of the church in Fairview itself, and only about 3,000 total in the entire North Texas Allen stake, divided among 7 wards and 11 congregations. So a stake usually has about 3,000 people in it. But we know from activity rates that, let's just say that about 1,000 of them are active. And maybe, I don't know, about half of them are adults. And then about 80% of those maybe have a temple recommend. We're talking about a temple here that is going to be utilized by just a few hundred people. And don't forget that Fairview is only 26 miles away from the nearest temple in Dallas-Fort Worth anyway. That's the entire rub here. Condi told me the church is overall hemorrhaging in North Texas, and so wants to build a giant temple and equally giant steeple to exaggerate its image. Gustavo, is this about exaggerating image in order to make people think that the church is still growing, or is this actually really important for this particular area, even though it's only going to be for a couple hundred members and it's only a few miles away from the nearest temple? Who's right?
Well, in this case, I personally don't mind the existence of the temple itself. Of course, I don't agree with the size, but if it's overcompensating, But I've seen that for some reason temples in the US are huge, and I don't really see a reason why. For example, I have family members in Layton, Utah. I've been there a few times. I was there in the Ogden Open Temple House 10 years ago. And I thought, my gosh, this is huge. This is even bigger than the Mexico City Temple, and that's considered the biggest temple in Mexico. So I don't know if they decide to make it that big because it's Texas, Fairview, Texas, or simply because they like big temples in the US for some reason. So I don't have an answer. I can only say that honestly, in my opinion, temples in the US are bigger than they should in general.
Okay, let's look at one more part from this particular article, and that's the somebody has put together a petition here, which is a 5-page document that you can sign to send a letter to the temple department. And if you sign this letter, it means that you would like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to take a more Christ-like approach to how they plan, propose, and integrate temples into the communities around the world. It does not mean that you don't like the temple or that you do like the temple. It just means that you would like the church to do better. We don't have time to go over this entire letter here, but it's an open letter to, the Bishop Kaze and everyone else in the temple department, including David Bednar, who's the head of the Temple and Family History Executive Council. And this letter basically just says, you know what? We need to follow Jesus's counsel of, following the laws of the land, being kind to one another, and the zoning and the height restrictions that basically what you talked about. We don't need a 173-foot steeple, and that we should be working with communities rather than threatening threatening to sue them, and that we should be loving our neighbors and be a lot more neighborly in our approach here instead of trying to force these things down these small planning commissions' throats. And that the church has been doing this actually not only in Fairview, but it's been doing it in Las Vegas and Cody and another things. And it says, why don't we just take a more Christ-like approach here? And you can add your name to the bottom of it. You can see that quite a few people have signed their name to the bottom of this particular list. Is this a letter that people should be signing here, Gustavo, that says that the church should, reconsider its approach to temples?
From what I read, it's in good faith. It's from an active member with no hard feelings towards the church. I think it can be a complicated situation because, if you just ask me, I'm like, sure, why not? The New Testament, for example, had Paul. I have to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Paul, but Paul was like, hey, what the heck, Peter? You're not including everyone in the gospel. And when we look at early church history, maybe it didn't always work, or it didn't always bring it the best results, but people, felt comfortable saying like, hey, Oliver, what the heck? Hey, Joseph, what the heck? Like there was at least conversation. So I don't see why you wouldn't be able to tell someone in high church positions, hey, I think this is a bit abrupt. Maybe we should be kinder. So I would say yes. In this case, the reason why I would see maybe pushback from other Latter-day Saints is because whenever something that we consider unfair or unnecessary or things like that, but I see many people from the former, what's the post-Mormon community saying, yeah, like I agree with that. No, so I see that when some Latter-day Saints see that people in the post-Mormon community agree with something, they usually say, oh no, that's bad, because they agree with it, right? Because some people say, yeah, sign it. As some members will say, I don't want to send out the wrong message. So I think that's why it can be complicated, but honestly, I don't think it needs to be complicated. So long story short, sure, why not?
Now you put together this meme that goes along with this, Gustavo. What are we seeing in this meme here?
Oh yeah, this was a bit of my reaction when I saw the article. So I was like, okay, we will talk about temples, and I saw Fairview, and I was like, oh, oh, like this is the situation that I don't really like at all, but this is what it is, and I just thought, well, maybe just have some dark humor with it.
Yes, kind of like Mr. Incredible here says, hey, he's in a good mood. Let's talk about temples. But then when you talk about the temples that are not being well received, or that there's being pushback, or that people are not appreciating, it's not quite as enthusiastic. Is that basically the idea of the meme here?
Basically.
Yeah, that's basically the sum up here. Let me just ask you one last question before we leave the temples here with the Fairview. Especially what the article said, considering that there's an extremely low number of people who will utilize this structure. You even talked about in your previous comments that the Chihuahua Temple, for instance, is basically only open just a couple hours a week, maybe just even one day a week for just a couple of hours, just doing a couple of sessions. The fact that this is only going to be used by just a couple hundred people and that it is very close to another temple, considering the size, as you also mentioned in your comments, that the U.S. temples are very much more expensive. They're very much larger than Mexican temples and in other temples throughout the world. Is there any number of temples that you would finally just say enough is enough? Is there a number of temples that you would say, you know what, I think that we've got enough? Or is the sky the limit? Should we have thousands upon thousands of temples on this planet that are only being utilized for a couple hours a week by just a couple hundred tithe-paying Latter-day Saints? Is there, I'm asking you about the cost-benefit analysis here of spending. Some of these temples are $30 million, $40 million, $70 million on structures that are hardly going to be utilized and that are close by to other structures and that are causing a great deal of stress in the community. Is there any number that we can put a limit on, or should we be having thousands on temples across the globe?
Speaking from a believer's point of view, recently we got like 5 new temples announced in the Mexico City area. We recently got dedicated the Puebla temple because Puebla is like a little Utah in Mexico, and there are a lot of members. And now the Mexico City temple is more open to people just from the city. There will be one built like 20 minutes from where I live. It's at the Luca Temple. From personal experience, I can say that when temples are necessary based on number, I don't have a problem with it. Here, I see that it has really helped and it will continue to help. So with smaller communities, such as a Chihuahua Temple, I would say that if they would do it, I have 2 opinions. The first one is that if they do it, will simply make it smaller. Maybe I'm not of the opinion that it shouldn't be made in the first place, but maybe just smaller and just make it according to the needs of the community. Now, on the other hand, we've had some comments about President Nelson announcing temples where one would say they're not really needed. So when it comes to why is he doing that, one might say to add something to his legacy count, to add numbers to his count. We've seen that already. You know, part of me really appreciates temples. They're a really special part of my life. And maybe my analytical point of view is that they should be built as many as are necessary depending on the needs of the people. What do I say about the ones that are basically announced on places where maybe there are no needs? I might struggle with that. I may not have a clear-cut answer, but I would say that I simply think that needs should be adjusted to the target audience.
I think the basic sum up of what you said here, Gustavo, that I can agree with you on is that if we made the temples smaller, I think that it would solve a great deal of problems. It wouldn't be as expensive. It wouldn't cause as many strains in the community. And you wouldn't have to, the morality of the temples, when it costs $70 million to make a temple and it's not open very often, when we have so much abject human suffering that takes place on this planet, then the moral question is also a little easier to handle. So I would just like to see these temples built smaller. If they need to be built, then build them smaller. And I think that that is going to be a big win for everybody who's involved. Now, the church has also this week got some good news here, Gustavo, as far as church reporting of its donations. And let's take a look at this article here. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, according to the church itself, has donated a combined $55.8 million to help women and children. So these donations, as we oftentimes see with the church typically doesn't donate directly. What it does is that it gives donations to the nonprofits that it affiliates with. And so it is donating that $56 million spread among 8 nonprofit organizations, which will improve nutrition for women and children under the age of 5 around the world through a multi-year Relief Society initiative. And that's why Camille Johnson, the head of the Relief Society, is the one who's announced this. So let's just read a little bit more about what the church is saying that it's doing. Expanding its global initiative to improve maternal and child health worldwide, the Relief Society General Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has announced a new combined donation of $56 million. Through this funding, the church will collaborate with 8 international nonprofits to strengthen health and nutrition programs in 12 high-need countries. So the organizations that the church is saying that is partnering here are CARE, Catholic Relief Services, Helen Keller International, IDE, MAP International, Save the Children, The Hunger Project, and Vitamin Angels. And here we have a picture of President Johnson here in a news release here announcing the donation here just a couple of days ago. She said that when it comes to collaborating and implementing global programs to improve maternal and child health, each of the organizations has an exceptional track record. And she continued, our goal is to help them scale their work and bring women and children the much needed health and nutrition services they need. We are confident in the abilities and their proven results around the world. So $56 million is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. That is a tremendous size of a donation. I think the largest church donation that I was familiar with prior to this point was when the church last year donated $44 million to the World Food Program. But this is a lot of money. It is a significant sum. What are your thoughts about the church's donation here to help those in need?
I think it's really important. And when it comes to the people that they're planning to help, there are need countries. So, for example, the inflation is different. Here in Mexico, I don't know, $1,000 can be, of course, significant amount. But here, it can be like someone's monthly wage, but if you are having a lot of luck, right? So the fact that it's dollars applied to the inflation in other countries, I think that the amount will be bigger, and what can be done with it will be much more than it was just if it was just US dollars for US people. I think US dollars for other countries can be very helpful.
That's an interesting perspective. I do want to bring up some, I would say, pushback on this particular article, because the charities who are associated with the church here, all of them that the church is dealing with here, from UNICEF to the Red Cross, although that's not in this particular aspect. Whenever the church is donating, all of the people who the church is partnering here with have much better transparency. I mean, they let us know what their donations are, their grants, their income, their charitable service expenses, their admin and fundraising costs, their capital reserves, the total assets, the total liabilities. The problem here is that the church is not at all transparent. We have no real understanding of what the church is doing with the finances. That makes it a significant challenge to really figure out what the church is doing. Now, I just want to give a couple of points on this. We can call all of these charities up, or at least reporters can do that, and confirm these donations. But the problem that we've seen in times past here, Gustavo, is that the church has claimed to make donations to different organizations. And then we came to find out later on in years afterwards that those donations were actually returned. Okay, so the church is claiming $56 million of humanitarian donations to these charities. But because the church is not externally audited, because there's no transparency, we can call them right now and confirm them, but we don't know if that money is going to be really executed, because it could be returned to the church later on, because that's what we've seen. That's the problem with having church internal auditing, which is incredibly opaque, and having no external auditing and no transparency. It makes it hard for me to accept the church's claims here of humanitarian giving when it is not backed up in any way with X's and O's of an outside organization coming in and saying, yes, the church gave this money and it was used to alleviate human suffering. That's the problem with transparency, is that it breeds mistrust. And especially considering, Gustavo, the fact that the church in times past has been very loosey-goosey, I'll put it that way, about what it's done with its finances, with the SEC fine and other things. That's the problem here with accepting the church's humanitarian claims at face value. All of these other organizations have transparency, external auditing, and all of these metrics year in and year out. You can look at their tax documents and you can have a great deal of confidence when you give a donation to these other 8 nonprofits that the church is working with, that your money is being used to help people. It is not the case at all with the church that you can have confidence in what the church is doing. Have I misrepresented here the situation? Or what are your thoughts on the church's, and I'm going to put this out there, alleged $56 million donation?
2 examples come to mind. One is church related and the other one is not. The first one is, I'm terrible with names, but a donation that the church tried to give to build you probably know this better than I, but
The First People's
yeah,
Museum. Right.
yeah. So that's an example of
Right.
them trying to make a donation and that being rejected.
Right. And I
So
just want to say that the church didn't report that that money was returned. We only found that out through other means. So the church, Gustavo, I'm going to let you continue, but the church says in all of these press releases, we donated this to this, we donated this to this. There's no external auditing. There is no way to really confirm these things in a long-term manner, as we found out from the First People's Museum. That's why I'm pushing back. Without the transparency here, we have to take the church's word for its humanitarian efforts for the vast majority of what it's saying. The church in the last year said that it gave out $1.4 billion in humanitarian giving. We can't confirm most of that giving, and it makes it hard when we see these good news stories. I see this a lot of times in my YouTube comments, and people say, look how much the church has given. No, look how much the church has allegedly given. If it was externally audited, if the church hired an external firm that gave us the X's and O's and said, this is how much they brought in, this is how much they went out, here's the overhead, here's the assets, then we can confirm that the church is doing good with this money. It's hard for me to take the church's word for it, as you can tell.
I've seen that happen. And on the other hand, I understand how stressful that situation can be. And the first example that popped to mind was the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial. One of the main accusations that was made to Amber Heard was that she alleged the money to an organization. I think it was a divorce money. And there was pushback like, did you donate it? I alleged to donate it. That's the same. And they was like, no, it's not the same. You need to give the money, then it's a donation. If you only promise to give the money, it's not a donation. So I understand how stressful and how that itself can work. This has been a conversation for a long time. And, ever since 2019 and, even before, it is stressful that the amounts, the expenses, all of that can be confirmed. I'd love to see that, but as you mentioned, this has not been their choice, and many people have given different reasons as to why. I can't really subscribe to one. The reason why me personally don't like to go around sharing many articles and things like that is because I'm like you in a way. I want to see things confirmed. I want to see what is done rather than what's been said. So a stressful situation. I agree with you. I like to see the benefits and the effects of something like this, before celebrating.
When you make a claim of whether it's some kind of humanitarian giving or whether it's a supernatural claim or a metaphysical claim, the burden of proof is on the person who's making the claim. So the church here is claiming that it is making a $56 million donation. So the burden of proof is on the church. And I withhold judgment, or I withhold, I can't make a reasoned decision without any evidence. And right now, all I have is a church's article that says that they made the donation. Did they actually do it? I mean, probably so, but that's the whole point. I don't know. And if at the end of the year, we had a real church humanitarian report, which had all the donations, all of the assets, all of the X's and O's, what went to overhead, what went over here, what did this, then we could have absolute or at least a high degree of confidence that the church is doing what it is saying that it is doing. And that's why Catholic Charities, the Red Cross, most of Lutheran services, UNICEF, all of these organizations are independently audited with full transparency as to every single dollar that comes in and every single dollar that comes out. That way, when they run a story that said that they gave away $56 million or $100 million or whatever it is, then we have a great deal of confidence that they're doing what they're saying that they're doing. Without transparency, we just don't have that for the church. And it's an absolute tragedy that we don't, because it is probable that the church is doing a lot of good, but we can't confirm that good. We just, there's no ability to confirm it. I mean, I cover the Mormon News Roundup, but I'm not an investigative journalist. I can't call all these different charities for years on end and make sure that they actually spent the money. It's really sad. I'll just say one other thing here before I give you the last word. Like, Jonah Barnes from Word Radio came into my YouTube comments to talk about this, and he said, well, show me where the Lamborghinis are. Show me where their brethren are enriching themselves. Show me where there's fraud, waste, and abuse. Show me where there's mismanagement of these funds. That's a misunderstanding of the burden of proof. I haven't alleged any of those things. Okay. All I've said is if you make a claim for humanitarian giving, you need to back up that claim. The church does not back up its humanitarian giving, and that's a problem. Now, our next article you brought to my attention here, Gustavo, what's going on with the Mormon History Association, the 59th annual conference?
I learned about this when a friend, most of you know him, Steve Pinecker, told me about the Mormon History Association. He told me he was there a few years in the past. He told me you should come, and I thought, oh, if only I could. That got me interested to see what it was. And there are a few things that make this Mormon History Association this year interesting. I think the first big meeting in Kirtland after the church purchased the temple, and it has been like just regular LDS, the same labels like white male, just meeting other white males and things like that. This year is special because they are including both Steve, who's an evangelical, as well as other people who are evangelical. It's looking out to be a more diverse meeting. And a Mormon History Association, something that I like about it is that believers and non-believers can say, hey, look what I found, and just be nerdy geeks about history. So some people in content creation find their niches. And while it's not my niche, what I personally prefer to consume is geeky, nerdy history stuff. So that's why this got my attention.
Yeah, you've got a lot of that kind of stuff on your channel. It's very interesting stuff here. Let's just take a look at the article itself here. It says the gender, race, and sexuality are going to be a front and center for this year's Mormon History Conference. It's June 13th through the 16th, taking place here just a couple of days ago, featuring a who's who of Mormon scholarship focusing on the lived religion in Kirtland, Ohio. And here's a picture of the Kirtland Temple, which was just reacquired by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, along with a bunch of other parcels for almost $200 million just a few months ago in, I believe it was late March. And the historian David Howlett, a Community of Christ member and the Mormon History Association president, he seconded this, saying he feels like crying sometimes when I think about the sale of the Kirtland Temple and the fact that it has changed hands out from the Community of Christ and now is part of the Brickamite branch. Nevertheless, he said he is confident his Latter-day Saint counterparts will be sensitive about what the monumental loss means for his religious community. Gustavo, how do you feel about the transfer of that Kirtland Temple over to the Brickamite branch?
First of all, I completely understand that nostalgic, sad feeling in regards to that. On the other hand, I don't see that, it was the church like holding a gun to their head saying, give it to us. It was just like situational, like things weren't working out. The offer was made and they struck the deal. So I understand how that loss of that change of hands could worry people, especially when the LDS temple is known for, the endowment, the ceiling. And the question was, will the Kirtland temple be turned into an ordinance temple? I think it was a very worry that people had because that would limit the amount of people who could get in, and that would dramatically change what is inside. It was a good call to keep it as it is because of its historical meaning.
Yeah, one last take here from this particular article is that Latter-day Saint General Authority 70, Kyle McKay, the official historian for the church, will kick off this event with an examination of the Kirtland Temple's past and future. Kyle McKay, he gave that famous BYU devotional address where he said that you're supposed to stare down compelling reasons to doubt your faith. And that does take us to our final article of the week here, which you brought to my attention as well here, Gustavo. There's a Hello Saints live stream, a summit here, which just took place. What's going on with the Hello Saints summit and live stream?
Here, Pastor Jeff, infamous, some people like him, some people don't, but he is an evangelical pastor. He moved to Utah, and now he is making this virtual summit, this sort of maybe virtual conference for a few days, in which he's trying to bring speakers from LDS camp and the evangelical camp to talk about doctrine, practices, and so there is communication between both sides and a greater understanding.
Yeah. Now, did you watch this particular conference here, Gustavo? Were you able to take it in? It has Greg from Quick Media. It has Kurt Frankum from Leading Saints, and it has a bunch of other folks in here, which I might say are somewhat right-leaning Latter-day Saints, if I could categorize them like this. I'm sure they wouldn't appreciate it if they did, but were you able to catch this summit?
I watched that speaker introductions. I've been trying to follow the live streams, but it's been hard because they happen while I'm working, so I haven't got a lot of them. But yes, I've checked it out.
Yeah, I do have a question here where there was Jacob Hansen. Was he part of that? And the reason that I ask about that, and this is, you could call it a very controversial, but I wonder why anyone would want a platform or be a part of anything that Jacob Hansen's a part of, because I have looked at a lot of his content and it seems very anti-gay. It seems extremely transphobic, and it seems incredibly homophobic. Why would anyone want to be associated with those type of ideas? I'm not sure if he was a part of this, but what are your thoughts on including Jacob Hansen?
When it comes to, should we call it right-wing Christianity, a lot of people tend to be very extreme. So I'm not saying to say Jacob can do whatever. No. But what I mean is that when we have a panel with evangelicals and LDS, those things sort of come with it. I'm not saying that it's that people shouldn't care about it or anything like that. The summit itself is for comparing beliefs. So the reason I personally connect with it is that there are people that I've met who have been really good and kind and doctrine-wise, or have been able to have good dialogue with other people, but they believe some things that I don't believe, and I think are weird. Because I don't want to get too controversial, but health-related issues, vaccines, the government, things like that, and I'm just like, what? And one might say, okay, if you don't agree with that, why would you even listen to what they have to say? And I think it would be the same reason why Steve Pinecker, a gay man, would invite Jacob to his show a couple of times, because it's a perspective. They're trying to bring content creators who bring their perspective in doctrinal issues. And now many of them have other external views that are controversial, but the topics themselves are just, hey, this is a Latter-day Saint. He might be left-wing, like, I don't know, David Butler, he's also included there. Many people call him left-wing. There's Greg Madsen, who could be considered right-wing and things like that. But they aren't there to talk about confusion in the church like Jacob does, but rather to talk about faith and works, to talk about sola scriptura. So I think that those topics are the ones that are important. I know Jacob. I don't think I can call him a friend. I just spoke with him for like an hour. Of course, his views are, some people would call extremist. But at the same time, I think the topics that are talked about, those are the things that matter. And even if people disagree in other topics, I know that this might sound sacrilegious to some people, but I would say it's sort of like separating art from artist, if people have a problem with that.
Yeah, I did have Jacob Hansen on the Mormon News Roundup once upon a time, so you can go back and check out that episode. And as far as the person who put it together, Hello Saints here, Jeff put together that YouTube channel a couple of years ago. I tried to get him on the Mormon News Roundup back when it was very first starting. I almost got him on, but I think he's a little bit too big for this channel now. But shout out to Jeff to see if he still wants to host an episode of the Mormon News Roundup. I did listen to this Mormonland podcast. It is a very good listen. Wyatt Pastor and recovering Mormon basher is teaching evangelicals about the LDS Church. He does have a persona, and he does have, I don't know, he does have an aura about him. And that's one of the reasons that he is a rising star and has almost 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. So maybe I can get him on the Mormon News Roundup someday. We will see. That does take us to our final segment here, which is the Mormon News Roundup Joke of the Week. And what do you got for us, Gustavo?
Oh, this is very stupid, but on Facebook, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of AI-generated images about Jesus or the cross or the Bible. And it's like, squint your eyes and you'll see the magic.
And what am I seeing here? What am I seeing if I squint here?
Well, this is Joseph Smith death mask.
Oh my goodness. Okay, the Donald Trump with
So
Donald Trump and Joseph Smith's death mask combined together. Oh
yeah,
boy.
so I see a lot of controversies when it comes to politics and religion, especially in the LDS camp. Luckily, I'm Mexican, so I don't have a part in that. But I just imagine myself sharing that maybe in a group and some people commenting amen. So I thought it was funny.
I see you trolling the Americans here, which I guess you can easily do as a Mexican a lot easier than I can. You also have a backup joke here. What are we seeing here?
Oh yeah, this is part since it's almost Carthage anniversary. Just imagine Joseph telling the city council like, "Let's destroy the expositor, let's prevent death, and then I die." And then it's like, "Wait, what?"
Very nice, Gustavo. You know, what projects are you working on here? How can people get in touch with you? What are they going to see if they come over to your YouTube channel?
Viajes de Fe. I think I forgot to mention this, but I'm Mexican. The content I do is in Spanish. I try to do what I enjoy doing. Sometimes, as you can see, the very second to last episode I uploaded, I just got a year on YouTube, and I just want to try something different. So I tried a comedy sketch, and I don't know if I did it right or not, but I'm just constantly trying to just do whatever I enjoy, talking to people, interviewing them, just get to know their opinion on certain topics. Sometimes I like to tackle some topics myself or share my story or things like that. I've been having sort of the Mormon book reviews or Mormonism with a more format that it's Zoom meeting recorded and that's it. When it's in English, I have to add subtitles and then I upload it. But I want to sort of change a little bit. I have zero budget. I I have like 400 subscribers, so I'm not really near monetization. So what I'm trying to do is trying to make it as free as possible, but I want to make sort of documentary style content. And I'm currently planning a mini documentary on Carthage and Joseph's death. I've been reading a lot of books. My head hurts just thinking about that. I'm about to finish them, then I'll write a script. I did a couple of interviews. I want to include clips, as you would see in a documentary, and just me sort of narrating. Just want to spice it up a little bit. But it's a big project I have.
That sounds fantastic, Gustavo. If you want to get in touch with me, your humble host, Steve A's, you can send me an email to Kolob@MormonNewsRoundup.org. You can also find us on TikTok, we're on Instagram, and we're on Facebook, and we're on X. And as far as the projects that I'm working on, every Monday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do an old review of an LDS classic. And this time, we're going to be reviewing tomorrow Forever Strong. This is an LDS affiliated film. It is not produced by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it centers around a bunch of Latter-day Saints. It's a very interesting movie. You can find new episodes of the Mormon News Roundup every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you come on over to YouTube at that time, you can interact with your humble hosts. Please like and subscribe and turn on notifications for the Mormon News Roundup. And I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma on Bandcamp.com for this episode's music. Gustavo, thanks for ruminating with me on the great and spacious beehive. Always think celestial, and remember.
No one hell hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.